Right. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We started 1 minute early, so that's a good sign, I think. Very warm welcome to you all to the CSJ. My job this morning is to run through a little bit about why we're here, what the report, of which you have a summary on the chairs, is all about. And then hand over to our fantastic panel to really kind of lead us through. They'll do the heavy lifting today. They can lead us through some of the key points. You'll notice an empty chair. We are not empty chairing anyone this morning, but this afternoon, Chris Bryant, the Minister, is on his way. He is a few minutes away and he will be here very soon. And so he'll join partway through this. So this report is about a year in the making. A year ago, a few of us had a dinner, actually, that Rory Brooks very kindly hosted for us. And the essay question that night was, give us some of your best ideas about philanthropy. What could we be doing more of? What should we be doing less of? And it's almost a year to the day that we have published this report called SuperCharging Philanthropy. Just by way of introduction, my name is Nathan Gamester. I run the CSJ Foundation. Most of you will know the CSJ is the foremost think tank in London, 20-year pedigree, looking at issues of poverty, particularly looking at root causes of poverty. And we specialize in finding and uncovering issues that other think tanks don't talk about, putting big campaigning efforts behind them, and then convincing government to change policy as a result. Anyone who picked up a copy of the Times yesterday will have seen, checks notes, the front page had the CSJ report, latest CSJ report covered on it, which we're very thrilled to see. The CSJ Foundation started 3 years ago, and what the foundation does is we support small charities in particular, both to make their voices heard in national policy making, but also through funding as well. As most people here will know, small charities struggle in particular accessing funding, and so the CSJ Foundation was set up to help address that. Before I get into the report and what it says, I do just want to say a couple of thank yous. My first of which was going to be to the Minister, Chris Bryant, who's not here right now. And so I will say it in his absence. He stepped in. Those of you who got the invitation to this will see that Stephanie Peacock was originally due to speak, and Chris very kindly stepped in when she had a diary clash. So we're very grateful to him for doing that. The second thank you is someone who's also not here, our colleague Sophia Warringer, who is actually the lead author of this report. She has a very good reason for not being here. She is due to give birth at any moment. As of 6 p.m. tonight, when I last spoke to her, she hadn't yet given birth, and so she may be on the live feed. Sophia, massive thank you to you for all you did for this report. And there's just a few others that I would like to mention as well. CAF, the Charities Aid Foundation, we're going to hear from Neil a bit later, supported this project from the start with a grant which allowed us to get it going, and we are incredibly grateful to them. Tony Berry, our great friend who sat there at the back, has also supported this, not just financially, but intellectually. He asked some of the toughest questions that we had during this process, and the report is much stronger as a result. And also, I just want to thank the Big Give who got behind this as well. We talk a lot about match funding in this report. Well, we put our money where our mouth was, and the Big Give very kindly got behind this, and we got some match funding to enable us to do this report as well. So let's get into it. What does the report actually say? Well, as you can tell from the title, Supercharging Philanthropy, we have been looking at ways to increase philanthropy in the UK. And throughout the project, I've had one of actually Rory's phrases in my head, which is, this is about more and better philanthropy. So it's not just about increasing philanthropy, it's about how we do philanthropy better. And in terms of the there it is. In terms of the methodology, we didn't want to do this just by theory. It needed to be informed by those on the ground who are most connected with the subject, philanthropists themselves. So we set about on a series of big listen events across 6 locations in the UK, from Edinburgh down to Bath, via Newcastle, Liverpool, Leeds and Loughborough. My apologies to anyone from Loughborough for the positioning on the map of Loughborough. Slight oversight on our part. As the slide says, through these big listens, we visited 6 cities, 220 grant makers in total we spoke to, representing at least £1.6 billion worth of philanthropic giving each year. And the report that we've produced is a combination of what they told us during those events, as well as our own analysis and input. So what does the report say? Well, first of all, we looked at the state of philanthropy in the UK. And a cursory glance at the statistics paints an optimistic picture. Charitable income has risen steadily since the millennium. High net worth giving has risen from £1,000 per giver to £5,600 per giver in 2023. And over 30 million UK adults, when polled, say that they've given money to charity over the last 4 weeks. However, when you look at the details, it tells a slightly different story. While the amount of giving has gone up, the number of givers is going down. Corporate donations from FTSE 100 companies have fallen. The UK's wealthiest dropped their donations by 200 million less in 2023 compared to 2022. And all this coming at a time when thousands of millionaires are leaving the UK. The UK is second to only China on that front. And when we talk a lot about when millionaires leave, we talk about the lack of tax revenue, we talk about the lack of investment in the UK. But one of the big things we don't talk about is the lack of philanthropy that goes as well when these people leave. The report also looks at regional imbalances and how philanthropy is broken down across the country. The long and short of it, as the table and the map shows on the screen, is London gets significantly more than anywhere else. When you break down the figures, London receives £18 per capita in non-government grants. The next highest region receives about half that, the Southwest. And if London was removed from the national picture, the overall spend falls by a third, which is really significant. So the big question that all of this leads to is what can be done? And there's good news. There is an appetite to give out there. Through our Big Listen series, we asked the over 200 attendees what would cause them to give more philanthropy. And from a wide range of options, by far the most popular was the presence of match funding opportunities. And this is backed by data from the Big Give, who find that on average, donations are 2.5 times higher than unmatched donations. So that leads us to one of our key recommendations in this report, which is that we believe that a match funding pot should be released equaling £3.2 billion. We've identified where this can come from, the sources including unclaimed gift aid. There's over £500 million worth of unclaimed gift aid every year, as well as dormant funds and dormant assets. And in the report, we've laid out the exact figures and the exact sources for this pot. And we've calculated that a fund of this size could release an additional £8.2 billion worth of philanthropy into the UK. So that's one of the recommendations. Another one is that we are encouraging the government to think philanthropy across what they do in government. So when there's a consideration, where the consideration of philanthropic partnerships is part of the normal process of policy making. And there's a quote on the screen there from Darren Jones, who spoke at our Bath Big Listen. And he said this: "We need all the functions of the state to ask, what could I do with philanthropic partnerships?" And of course, this isn't just theoretical. We've listed there on the screen, and we've profiled in the report a number of programs that have seen successful partnerships between private philanthropy and government, from the Academies programme to on-site youth zones to regional employment boards. So thinking philanthropy at the heart of government is another recommendation. And as part of this, we're calling on the government to adopt a practical national strategy for philanthropy with clear ministerial responsibility and ministerial targets. We believe the strategy should include the creation of a national champion tasked with meeting set financial metrics for philanthropic giving, under whom should be appointed 12 regional champions responsibility for helping address what we saw just there, that regional imbalance in terms of philanthropy. And to help address the regional disparities as well, we're calling on metro mayors to include philanthropy in their local growth plans. And also the report calls for the creation of charitable investment zones. We also make a series of recommendations for the Charity Commission. I'm delighted that Rory is here as well from the Charity Commission. Things like to publicise the tax benefits of legacy giving, to campaign to increase payroll giving, to launch a national gift aid awareness campaign, and to look at this issue of low spending foundations as well, and consider how those organisations could be incentivised to increase their grant making. I'm very aware, though, that a lot of this is aimed at government, and we've been very careful through the report actually to aim a good set of our recommendations at grant givers themselves. And so we've been careful not just to target government. We have a full set of recommendations for grant givers, much of which comes from extensive discussions with charities and grant givers themselves. We talk about things like increasing standardization of the application process. We know that 3/4 of applications are rejected, and yet for charities, particularly small charities, they take hours, days, weeks to complete. We also call for the increase of transparency around why some applications are or are not accepted. Good afternoon, Minister. Very good to have you with us. Thanks for being here. Perfect timing, because I've just finished, so you haven't had to sit and listen to what I've had to say. But you are here for the most important part of what I'm going to say, actually, which is I'm going to end by referring you all to the foreword of this report, and going back to sort of the start of the report and looking at the foreword, because we've talked a lot about, as I just mentioned, what government can do and what government should do in all of this. But one of the most important things here is how philanthropists themselves respond. And what we have in the foreword is a group of over 30 of Britain's leading philanthropists who are all saying, we're here, we stand ready to respond, we will be generous, and we will be creative. The metaphor they use in the foreword is this: if the government builds the solid banks of the river, we will work to make the water flow. And so, Minister, before I hand over to you, I think if you and your team leave today remembering only one thing, let it be this: that there are philanthropists out there, quite a few in this room, actually, who are eager to partner with the government to make good things happen. Now, with that, I will turn over to our panel. It's a phenomenal group. Carlsberg don't do philanthropy panels, but if they did, I think they would look something like this. We have Sir Chris Bryant, Minister in DCMS, responsible for creative industries, arts and tourism. Neil Heslop, OBE, Chief Executive of the Charities Aid Foundation. Rory Brooks, a longtime friend of the CSJ, philanthropist and charity commissioner. We have Kath Dovey, CBE, founder of the Beacon Collaborative, and Andrew Law, chairman and CEO of Caxton Associates, philanthropist and leading thinker and doer on all things philanthropy in the UK. I'd like to start, Minister, with you, if that's okay. We've only got you for a brief amount of time, but could you set out for us what you view the government's, what's the government's vision, what's the government's approach to philanthropy?
Well, number one, I think it's very important to say thank you, both to you for doing this and also to philanthropists who have made a phenomenal difference to so many different aspects of our public life over the last, 50, 100, 200, well, many, many, many years. The second thing is, I think we need probably to put together a better offer for philanthropists in the UK. So that when they give, they know that it's going to have the effect that they want it to have, and we might want to incentivize that more. And that's one of the things that I've got, or Steph Peacock, who's the minister in charge of philanthropy within DCMS, and I, looking at it from an arts angle, are very much focused on at the moment, how we can make sure that we've got the right kind of package available. Obviously looking at examples in other countries, whether the United States of America or France or Spain, Italy, and so on. Thirdly, I think I'm very aware as the arts minister that the chair of a big cultural institution in London will find it much easier to find 20 million, 30 million, 40 million, whatever, than someone running an organization in the Northeast, the Northwest, the Midlands, or whatever. Now, I'm not a big fan of the jargon around place-led and all that kind of stuff, but you make the point in the report about how can we make sure that the fruits of philanthropy are better felt across the whole of the country. I also have a suspicion that some people might want to give more if they knew of a means of giving in their local area that was to benefit their local area, if that makes any kind of sense. And it may be that AI will help us to do that in future years. I don't know, but that's another element of what we've got to look at. And I suppose my last point is, I know I apologize about this, but I don't really like the word philanthropy. Because I mean, I've talked to trustees who are trustees of, you know, long-standing foundations and stuff. Many of them are of a generation and they go, I have no idea what you're talking about. Do you mean giving? And so I think we need to revitalize that whole debate in the UK. You know, the fundamental difference between us and the United States of America is that lots of people expect, as part of their national daily duty or their local daily duty, to give large amounts of money on a monthly basis to a variety of different organizations, whether it's an arts organization or a health organization or something looking after animals or the environment or whatever it may be. And we haven't got that in the bloodstream at the moment in the UK. And that's the thing I would most dearly love to do. And I think we need to think about the language to enable that to happen. I mean, I give through Give As You Earn. It goes to Charity Aid Foundation. And that's great. But if I'm struck by the fact that people in my constituency, which is one of the poorest in the land, give more as a percentage of their income than the richest people in the land. That isn't true in some other countries. And if we could turn that on its head, we'd have many, many more pounds to be able to invest in the kind of social infrastructure that we all really want.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you.
I go now. No, I'm here.
You mentioned Charities Aid Foundation. I'm going to turn to Neil Heslop next. Neil, you and I were talking before, and you were sort of saying, actually, this is really good timing. Now is the time to make some of these changes. Could you explain a little bit more about what you mean by that, and why is now the time?
Yeah, sure. And thanks, Nathan. And maybe I should just start by just welcoming this CSJ report. I think it's a really important contribution to the policy debate about how we do boost philanthropy or charitable giving. Can I have a secret confession? I don't particularly like the word philanthropy either. and actually, I am told by far better scholars than I that the origins, when you unpack what philanthropy means, it means a love of humanity. And for me, I think that language about giving is very, very important to reframe the conversation that we're having. So we at Charities Aid Foundation were very pleased to support this research, in particular by you mentioned the Big Listen events, Nathan, and I think that's really, really important because I do want to capture the sentiment that the insights that sit behind this report's recommendations are really drawn from the voices of many hundreds of donors, but also of small charities themselves. I think all of us we know that Britain is a generous country. You know, CAF's UK Giving Report highlighted in 2023, the public gave some 13.9 billion in that year. But we also know that there's probably never been a tougher time for charities than right now, with the long-lasting legacy of the pandemic and the cost of living crisis. Many of these organizations, which are absolutely central to our social fabric, are dealing with that triple whammy of higher demand, increasing costs, and real pressure on income. And I think all of us would probably agree that charities play an incredibly important role binding us as a society together. They're very, very active in the heart of all of the communities right around the country. And yet that point that you made, Nathan, many of us as citizens are getting out of the habit of giving. And that ecosystem of charities are in the position where they are increasingly relying more and more on fewer and fewer people. And the same is true for the contribution of our businesses. Other CAF research demonstrates that our largest listed companies, the FT 100 over the last 10 years, profits have increased by 49% over that period. And yet their giving expressed through community investment is down by 34% in real terms. So I think the report, in the way that you have framed it about timing, Nathan, it is incredibly important. We do need a long-term, serious effort to turn some of those long-term trends around. And I do believe that now is the right time for the government to set out a bold vision such that philanthropy or giving actually extends to all different parts of the country. All of us have got a vested interest in revitalizing a British culture of giving if we're going to build the more connected, the more generous, the more resilient and socially cohesive communities that all of us want to live in. And as you've seen from many of the people in this forward, and very many others, there are a lot of people in this country who do have money and do want to give. And the signaling that the government can give in a very clear, strategic way will mobilize those funds. I'm absolutely convinced of it. We very much welcome, and I appreciate you don't like the place-based language, but really welcome the DCMS commitment around a place-based philanthropy strategy, because I think that is something that we've called for, and we've started to see some real traction coming out of DCMS. Also really welcome the fact that Treasury have set up an advisory group to really explore some of the policy development around how you get socially motivated capital investment from different parts of the impact economy properly flowing. I think that analogy that you've used about the banks and the rivers are really powerful metaphor. I think in terms of the point about timing, I think what the report does to say, think philanthropy, and Darren's observations about how those in government need to think about the potential of philanthropy partnerships. I think that's on the demand side. On the supply side, why now? Because I don't think there's ever been a greater consensus amongst the ecosystem of philanthropists and organizations interested in this space around what are the things that will really make a big difference. And many of them are in your report and elsewhere. We know that upskilling wealth advisors will make a massive difference. The institutionalizing around government programs of this match funding first principle that you've talked about, Nathan, reinstituting mandatory reporting around corporate fundraising, and selectively investing in local infrastructure. Collectively, all of those things, some of them are fiscally free, so, and the rest are very practical and very modest investment with a terrific multiplier effect. So I do think it's for all of those circumstances as to why now is the time for us to crack philanthropy or giving, whatever we call it, to a far greater degree than we've managed up till now.
Brilliant, Neil, thank you. Now, the whole sort of charity ecosystem has a regulator, the Charity Commission, a big player in all of this. And Rory, I want to come to you next to ask what your view is. And we've made some recommendations of the Charity Commission in this report. What's your view of the role of the regulator in all of this?
Well, thank you, Nathan. Thank you for inviting me on the panel. It's a great pleasure to see so many friendly and very well-informed faces in this audience this morning. or this afternoon. It would be pretty odd to be sitting in one of these chairs and not welcome this report, actually. The report is welcome, and I have to say, I think it's a very well worked through report. We haven't had an awful lot of time to read it, but I think it's pretty dense, and there are a large number of recommendations for a large number of people to take on board. So I'd like to speak about this briefly through the lens of the Charity Commission itself. Now, last year, the Charity Commission launched its new 5-year strategic plan. I'm sure you've all read it thoroughly, and I don't need to tell you what's in it. But just as a reminder, it is obviously our goal to sustain ourselves as being a fair, balanced, independent, ever increasingly expert regulator and a supporter of the charity ecosystem. And I think that has taken just a little bit more preeminence in the list of things that we try to do, because ultimately we are the custodians of public benefit as enshrined in law, and we want to make sure our charitable sector conforms to those requirements of public benefit. In looking at supporting charities, clearly there are various stakeholder groups that we look at, in particular trustees. We look at, we encourage them and guide them as to how best to exercise their duties. We look at managements of charities. We pay a lot of tribute, and as do other organizations, to the vast army of volunteers who give their time freely and willingly to support the charitable sector. But we probably haven't quite focused as much on the money. And the British don't like to talk about money all that much, but actually charities need money. And we've already had pointed out this morning the fact that charities are under an awful lot of pressure, and we need to get more money to charities. And I'm not going to get into the giving versus philanthropy debate, but they do need more money. And by being supportive to the philanthropic sector and by having a commissioner who actually looks at this sort of thing, that's evidence that we, the Charity Commission, want to try and support philanthropy. I have to say along the road that 2 years ago, this kind of event simply wouldn't have taken place. And philanthropy has gone from being nowhere for being discussed to being now an increasingly vibrant part of both the national conversation and indeed the government conversation. And if I may say so, one person in particular had the foresight and the energy to make that happen and put this on the map. And he is still the current chair of the Charity Commission, Orlando Fraser, who happily is in the audience today. So Orlando, I hope you look at this and see this as a good and partial outcome. And I think that we have, using too many metaphors, we're climbing the mountain a lot, but we haven't really planted any flags yet. And I think that this report gives us guidance as to how to plant some flags and increase the flow of philanthropy throughout the country and make it a normal part of the everyday converse of our society. Having been in financial markets for a lot of my life, the business of getting big money to small places is one of the worst intermediated markets I have ever seen. And of the steps that we hope that can be exercised through this report and that are being done now through a whole bunch of workshops working with government, and I think, Kath, you will speak to this, we'll see if we can improve the plumbing to make sure that, because I think a lot of that money wants to go to small places and to smaller charities and to smaller outlets for philanthropy. So I'm very encouraged by this report. We've all got our shoulders to the wheel. The Commission will obviously study these recommendations and figure out what is within its capacity. I can tell you for now, if you want us to do all of them, we're going to need some more resources, but that's a frequently heard refrain. So I'll stop there and leave to others now to pick up the thread.
Fantastic, Rory, thank you. I forgot to say at the start that we're going to have plenty of time for audience questions as well. So once we've heard from the panelists, do think about who you might want to target some questions at. I'm going to come to Kath next. We've talked about infrastructure already. We've talked about place-based, whether that's a good phrase or not to use. You are someone right at the heart of conversations around both of those sorts of things. So Kath, over to you. What are your reflections on the report itself, but also those things in particular?
Thank you, Nathan, and thank you for the report. 220 people from across the country, all of them engaged in this activity we call philanthropy, all saying we need this infrastructure. We've been saying this for years in London. We're now hearing it from the regions, and that's because your team went out and talked to them. So thank you. It makes a huge difference. Philanthropy does want to flow where it's needed, and I'm going to call it philanthropy because if you sit and think about how you can make a difference, not just putting pennies in a pot or putting the direct debit in place that you never think about again, you are doing something different from just giving, and you are trying to make an incremental difference to people's lives. And you're doing it in a way that works alongside government, because a philanthropist will always get money to places where government can't reach. These charities exist because there are places government can't reach, and there are needs that government isn't supporting. So it's additional, and it provides the fuel for charities to do things differently and better themselves. And we should celebrate that. And we should celebrate the work that philanthropists do. And we can't do that celebration on our own. We can do it in partnership with those who have the capacity to say, this is something that we want in our country and we want more of it. And we're going to put the banks in place down that river because it's important. There is a role for government here to put in place that capacity and to provide the incentives to get the money flow where it needs to go, possibly from London to places where it isn't as prevalent at the moment. So I will use the word philanthropy because it matters a lot to me, that we understand that this activity is incrementally important to our country, above and beyond what happens with government funding. I think the report is brilliant in the sense that it maps out a lot of things that really are practical and could happen. Some of them are incremental. Some of them we've been calling for a long time because, my goodness me, they're cheap and they are, some of them are free. It's just basic plumbing that we could put in place at no cost tomorrow with the stroke of a pen, and it would be game changing. And some of them are really big and bold and ambitious, and start talking about, actually, if we want that leverage that comes from philanthropy, there does have to be some investment in capacity. And let's have a serious conversation about where that money is going to come from and where it's going to go, so that we can agree on some objectives and get the investment behind it. This is not a cost to government, this is an investment. Every pound that government puts in, more money will come out in the places that need it. That's the bottom line with philanthropy. And you've mapped out a brilliant way of starting to think about some of those challenges in a really practical and incremental and game-changing way. So I think well done to you and the team, and particularly Sophie, if you're on the line.
Brilliant. Thank you, Kath. Andrew, coming to you next. I said at the end of my remarks that philanthropists are saying that they're willing to step up, that they're ready to partner with government. And I'd like to ask you, as a philanthropist, does that ring true to you? Do you feel like there is, you're looking for opportunities, or philanthropists in general looking for opportunities to step up and partner with government?
Well, thank you for having me here today. I think the answer to the question is yes, but they do need some help. And I'll give a personal answer to this, and also reflect on the fact that giving is a personal decision, and we should all recognize that. We shouldn't try and box people in necessarily. But in my conversations with fairly wealthy people or wealthy people, I usually open with, how much money are you intending to leave to your children? To which most of them say not very much, or a limited amount relative to their net worth. And I then say, what are you going to do the rest? And they say, we're going to give it to charity when we die. And I say, why not today, when you can be a steward of that money and oversee programs that mean the most to you? And I often get fairly blank stares back at that point. So I think there needs to be some sort of help and guidance and frameworks that could help people give. And that's why the idea of the national philanthropy champions or the regional ones might be helpful, because it just gets ideas to people. Your idea of having a philanthropy certificate for solicitors in particular to help on the drafting of those wills, or to make people really think about it at that stage, is a brilliant idea, alongside the wealth manager one. But I think also the government should reflect on the fact that many people don't want to give to charity because they regard it as the government's job to look after people. And this goes back to what Martin Luther King said, as commendable as philanthropy is, don't let it overshadow the fact that there are injustices, and that should be dealt with principally by government. So we need something that's different to basic need. And in many cases, this is my own personal giving view, is that charities should do what the governments can't do for whatever reason. So at Speakers for Schools, for example, that I chair, where we get eminent people to give over 1,000 talks a year, could you imagine if the government phoned up the CEO, the chair, or an amazing Michelin-starred chef and ask them to go and give a talk in a local comprehensive, they probably wouldn't even take the call. But if Robert Peston or one of my fellow trustees makes the call, they feel a personal network effect to do that. So I think we really need to be clear about what the government should be asking and what some others should ask. Match funding, brilliant idea again. You know, a lot of potential philanthropists would like to know that they've got some other experienced people alongside them, and there's a clear framework. That, you know, some people like to give and then hand over the management to others, and so forth. But above all else, I think we need to reflect on the fact that everybody's different. If you're a sales manager for a company, you would have a different offer to each and every level of wealth, or somebody that cares about their place, or someone that cares about education. We just need a whole range of different offers to different people. We don't want to box this in too much in how we think about it.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, Andrew, thank you for that. I'm going to hand over to questions from the audience now. And I know that there's a lot of expertise and experience in this space in the room. And I'm also aware that Minister Bryan, I think you have to slip out before the end. So I thought we'd get some questions in early doors. You're frowning at me. Maybe that's wrong. Maybe you're here till the end. But
No, I've got the data bill.
He says enthusiastically.
And then I've got to see somebody from Universal Music at Downing Street.
Oh, well. Who would like to kick us off? There we go. First question, lady at the front. If you could just wait for the microphone to arrive.
Casey Green from Leicester and Rutland Community Foundation. We also welcome the report on the Community Foundation Network. And I have to say, I steal your statistics all the time for my speeches. But there is a plumbing that exists. There's a platform throughout the country with community foundations. There's one in every county. We already work with local philanthropists, and we give out millions and millions in grants to small place-based charities every year. So I kind of wanted to, that I've been wanting to work with you for some time. It's quite difficult because we all work locally. We have got a national UKCF, which I know is talking increasingly to government. I just wanted to say that plumbing does exist. It doesn't need to be reinvented. It works well. Yeah. We do go deep into communities with philanthropic money.
Yeah, excellent point. Thank you. Anybody on the panel want to say anything about community foundations? Because I think it's a good point that there is plumbing, there is infrastructure out there. Kath, I might call on you.
Yeah, and it's a good point, and thank you for raising that. You're absolutely right. We have community foundations, 47 community foundations? 47, yeah. So they work across the UK in places. I think the challenge is that it is a form of plumbing, and it's not necessarily plumbed into the sink. The sink, for example, wealth advice. Let's come back to wealth advice. And I think Andrew touched on this a little bit. At the moment, if you want to talk to an advisor about giving money away, you can go to your wealth advisor and they'll say, I'm sorry, we don't really cover that. We only cover your investments. So you're on your own. And then you have to go and find out where the other bits of infrastructure are that you can, and you work alongside. But imagine if wealth advisors actually had a conversation with their clients at the start of the year and said, alongside your lifestyle needs, how much would you like to give to charity this year? Let's plan that in. Let's plan that few £1,000s. And by the way, I can introduce you to the community foundations who will help you to give it away. Absolutely. Do you know how many wealth advisors are trained on philanthropy in the UK? It's appallingly low. Yeah. And we're not asking, the report is very straightforward. All it says is, please can the FCA include within the handbook that philanthropy is a financial activity, and can we please have advisors trained on what it is? This is not deep, complicated regulation. It is very, very straightforward, but it would be game changing because then the sink would be attached to the pipes, and we don't have that at the moment.
I worry where the plumbing analogy might take us by the end of the event. But Nick, I'll do a question. There is a microphone coming to you.
Thanks, Nicole Sykes, Lloyds Bank Foundation. There seems to be tons of agreement about what we could do. I'm interested in what we can do now to sort of speed up that policy change.
Minister, I might ask you to take that question.
I left one thing out, actually, which I should mention, which is exercising me a lot, which I call the Bailey-Gifford problem, which is lots of book festivals and other festivals, music festivals and so on have faced this, for that matter, museums and galleries have faced this real problem, that other people decide who is ethically appropriate for them to take money from. I mean, that is proving a bit of a death knell for a whole series of different cultural organizations in the UK. And beyond feeling just frustrated and irritating and wanting to get even crosser about it, I'm trying to think up ways of enabling people to give into a pot which then goes elsewhere without people then losing the sense of giving, if you see what I mean, to a particular cause. It's a very difficult square to circle. Do you square a circle? Anyway, and my sink doesn't connect with my drains at home, in fact, at the moment, so I've got to sort that out. But so that's the thing that I'm fastest working on, because there's so many different organisations, you know, whether it's the Hay Festival or the Edinburgh Book Festival and so on, or the National Gallery for that, no, the British Museum. That matter. But just in terms of timetable, I commissioned a set of people before Christmas to come up with some ideas about arts philanthropy, which we're working through at the moment. I know that Steph Peacock is working with Downing Street on producing some bigger ideas later on this year. I've had a couple of former chancellors say to me, this is a very difficult area, you know. I remember announcing a whole new philanthropy policy, and it didn't lead to any more philanthropy at all. So, I mean, I'm very careful about trying to put things that are genuinely actually going to deliver. And that is not easy at a time when people haven't got a lot of money in their pockets.
Rory, I think you wanted to come in.
Nicole, you touched upon something very pertinent. A lot of what's in this report addresses the environment for philanthropy, what improves the famous plumbing, what improves the mechanisms for getting money to go to good places. But there's also an argument about the climate for philanthropy. And you point out, Minister, that there is a slightly corrosive environment out there about philanthropy. But philanthropy still remains misunderstood. People are a little suspicious about it, people a bit reticent. And we need to do a much better job. We can't leave this only to people like Beth Breeze to put this right and address, and John Nixon, who's sitting here, to make philanthropy a better story, the right story about the part it plays in the fabric of our society. And that mission also needs to be accomplished so that we can improve the reputation for philanthropy throughout the country.
There's another thing, incidentally, just because I've got the data bell in my head and we're doing lots of stuff about smart data, I just wonder whether there isn't a way of making give as you earn much simpler, using the open banking system that, you know, is now commonplace for everybody, where it's remarkably difficult to increase the amount you give. You have to talk to about 5 different people, and they want it in triplicate, and they've got certainly this is almost impossible if you want to do it with the Independent Parliamentary Standards Authority.
Fascinating. We have a whole recommendation around give as you earn in the report, which
yeah, I know.
Yeah, send over. Thank you. Orlando Fraser.
Just to welcome this report. Just to welcome.
It's if I may, it's for the benefit of the live feed, if that's all right.
Just to welcome this report on behalf of the Commission behind Rory. One, we were asked how best things could be actioned. I'm old enough to remember the CSJ Breakdown Britain and Breakthrough Britain report, which I stood actually. I was one of the members of one of the boards, and it was notable that the report which had the most action was the one in which the author, which was Ian Duncan Smith on worklessness, went into government and pushed through the conclusions on universal credit and so forth. And it strikes me that one of the ways in which this government could ensure some drive would be to co-opt a central figure from this report to help drive this through, because it's when you have authorship and ownership, it really matters where you see things happen, in my experience.
Which is not dissimilar to our recommendation of having a national philanthropy champion. I wonder if any of the panel wants to pick that up, and Minister, whether you can say anything about whether that's realistic to have someone in government or appointed by government to play that role.
Well, I think I've self-appointed myself in the arts section. But it is Steph Peacock, and she's very keen on developing it. I should say the last time I was in this room was with Ian Duncan-Smith, and the two of us were launching a report on introducing Magnitsky sanctions on bad Russians. That was quite successful.
Absolutely. Go on, Kath.
I'd just say on philanthropy champions, I mean, this is again a recommendation that's been mentioned many times. It's because we need somebody who can hold and own the strategy and be accountable for it on a daily basis, and work with colleagues in government to say, your job is to set the targets and we can deliver, but we need to work with you on those targets and on those incentives. And we can have a champion who is accountable for making this happen. And at the moment, we don't have that regular touch point around targets. To your point around it being difficult to measure, it is very difficult to measure. And so previous chancellors may not know whether or not philanthropy increased as a result, but we're getting better at measuring it. So let's now set those targets and goals with government, and let's have a champion who can take responsibility and accountability for putting in place a strategy that can get us to those targets.
I'm toying with, I'm not meant to say this. Where's
Don't let that stop you, Minister.
I'm toying with giving myself a target for philanthropy in the arts, an annual target. But I don't know how to construct it. So it would be really helpful if people came up with suggestions on what that might look like.
And also the strategy that will support you to deliver it, because that's the riverbanks again.
Yeah, so that's Steph's role, me working with her. But anyway.
Angela.
Well, I think your report has got a suggested answer to this in it, in that submissions to HMT by the various spending departments should have a philanthropic ask associated with them. And I go back to the Academies programme for this, started under Andrew Adonis and conceived by the Cameron government, put in place a framework to let private sector people support the creation of new schools. I mean, it was in the Labour manifesto before the election that they wanted youth clubs to be re-established across the UK. Why not get local sponsors to sponsor youth clubs? Yeah. And again, if it's part of the legislation that philanthropy will fund this, then the minister, by definition, is ultimately responsible for the delivery of that, and they will appoint a champion to champion it.
On that specific point, we profile on-side youth zones in this report, which is a brilliant example of partnership between private and local authority funding to do exactly that, create fantastic high-tech youth clubs in communities. John Nixon next.
Thank you, and thanks and congratulations to everybody on this welcome report. But I think since it was written, the context has changed. The world, we are told in the media today that we're at a crossroads in terms of the future of liberal democracies. So whilst we've made a much needed and welcome commitment to investing more in our defense, I think we need to put this report into the context of the equally imperative need to invest in social capital. Now, Andy Haldane can make the case much better than I can for the investment in social capital, but it's the role of the philanthropy has to play in national rule renewal through investment in social capital. And I'm making this point because I think we all need to raise our game. I'm not just looking at the minister, but if we put our work into the context of the security of our liberal democracy and its future, I think people who give might find that motivating.
Can I put that in a different way, which is, what are we fighting to defend? We're fighting to defend a way of life and a quality of life and a quality of social life and cultural life that is really worth living and enables people to us to be a country that is better at ease with itself and enables people from whatever their background to be able to have a chance to prosper and feel that they have a share in that society. And the only way you achieve that is not only if we will have to make difficult decisions in government about how we spend our money, but we will also, as a nation, as a set of people, will have to make a set of decisions about how we really create a world that we want to live in this country.
Yeah. Perhaps you'd like to write the forward to my next book.
Minister, your team, I think, are itching to pull you away.
They are. Sorry.
No worries. At the very start, you missed it, but I did say a huge thank you to you for stepping in when Stephanie had to pull out, and we're very grateful on what is clearly a very busy day for you to be here. So thank you very much. We've still got another 10 minutes or so, and I know there's a whole load of questions. Mark, you've got a question.
Thank you. I'm Mark McEwen. I'm a solicitor specialising in philanthropy. First of all, yeah, welcome the report, especially the inclusion of the devolved regions. Often where Scotland is concerned, things happen in a vacuum, and I was really pleased that we were able to be involved. I have a question about an angle on the Baillie-Gifford problem. We often tend to approach this from a corporate perspective. I deal with philanthropists who are increasingly looking at the donor-advised funds for their giving. And my concern is that some of the donor-advised funds, the big commercial ones, not, I should say, CAF, are introducing anonymity as a default when individual givers are not really given the option to have their names out there. Is there anything we can do to try and encourage them perhaps to not have that as the starting point? Because my experience is with individual donors, they're more open to having their names out there.
Neil, can I go to you with that one?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really important insight. But I go back to a little bit about what Andrew said. You know, philanthropists come in all shapes and sizes. A lot of the philanthropists that we talk to, in that slightly, old-fashioned British way, are a bit embarrassed by it, and they worry about their generosity being misinterpreted in an increasingly febrile social media world. Because fundamentally, if they've gone through life, they've got their set of relationships from school and from university, and they might have gone on to do extraordinarily well, and they worry that by being very public about it, it places pressure on their relationships with their family, friends, and colleagues. Now, I know that simply because that was the feedback that came back from some of the philanthropists at one of your big listen events. So that's true. Now, but I think partly the response to that is these, and whether we talk about philanthropists or giving, the practical reality is we haven't achieved a balance in really elevating and celebrating those who give so much in such a way that it inspires many others around them in a way that feels natural and comfortable in the way that you see in the United States. So we certainly encourage all of the philanthropists that we work with to be, in their own way, loud and proud about what they're doing, because that higher purpose about inspiring others to follow suit, it is what we want to see. Your point about DAFs is really important, because there's a lot of cynicism about the payout rates of DAFs and so forth, particularly imported from North America. I do think that there's an opportunity for us in this country to reach a much more culturally appropriate set of arrangements, such that transparency is the default within constraints, or rather within regulation. But the acid test has to be about not just that there is more going out, but that more is being translated into the thing that everyone cares about around impact. And I do think that there's a schizophrenia in this country about the some squeamishness around wealth that we've just got to get over. We've just got to get past it, because we're all citizens of this country. And what Chris said in response to the context that's going on in the world, social cohesion, that love of humanity, that being part of a place, a community, family, all those things, that is so important. And it's what the next generation need to see being bought into by those with the levers of power.
I just pick up on the point about anonymity. Andrew, I want to come to you because you talked about conversations you have with people about giving sort of now versus in their wills. Does the issue of privacy versus anonymity come up in those sorts of conversations that you have?
Yes, it does. But I think there's many ways of people giving without it becoming a matter of public record. Yeah. But I would also say that, you know, people will criticize certain philanthropists, whether it's their literary festivals or the galleries with oil money or whatever. But, you know, you can't do many things in life without getting criticism from people nowadays. I mean, you know, look at amazingly successful footballers and how many times they get written off or abused on a Saturday afternoon. Politicians, bless them. I mean, how many people would put their hand up to do that nowadays with their death threats and so forth? So we do need to rise a little above the fray and take some flack. But again, people need to have choice between anonymity and not.
Yeah. Lady here.
Thank you.
And then I'll come to you.
Thank you. Eugenie Harvey. I am the Chief Executive of an infrastructure organisation, the Funding Network, and we work with wealthy individuals on the one hand and small charities on the other, founded by a very inspirational philanthropist who will be known to several people in this room, Fred Mulder, Canadian, really, really wonderful person, a fantastic example. I wanted to just quickly challenge the anonymity point, because I think that's a little bit age old, not to say it isn't true, but I think our expectation needs to be that transparency is the norm these days, rather than perpetuating this sort of, we're British, we don't talk about it. I don't mean that critically, but I'm just saying I work with young, professional, wealthy people, and I don't think they identify as fading violets, and I don't think they've been successful in what they've done and made the money without, you know, taking some flack. So I think we need to just draw a line under that and say transparency is good practice and it's the norm. I wanted to make the point about infrastructure organisations, and to echo what a colleague over here had. It's ridiculous how difficult it is for us as an infrastructure charity to raise the money to leverage funds for small charities. And I just wanted to put in the conversation the need for that. But my main thing is, how are you holding the government to account on this? There are so many brilliant ideas in this, and I'm sure a lot of people like me are so excited, but how are we not in 12 months' time going to be sitting around saying, well, nothing came of that? Yep. I wanted to say this because the minister needs to be held to account. And I think we need to be in this room in 12 months' time and say, what happened?
Yeah, great stuff. I'm actually going to take another question. We've got 5 minutes left. There's a gentleman at the back who's had his hand up, and then we'll hold that point in terms of how we can make sure something happens. I'm sure panelists have different views on that, but another question as well.
I'm not really excited. I'm a bit skeptical, but I'm also very hopeful. I've got scars on my back from this over many years. I think it's not true to say there's been no previous efforts to do this. I built and ran MPC, New Philanthropy Capital, to that which was originally set up in accounting at Goldman Sachs with the ambition of improving the quality and quantity of charitable giving. It failed, as did the Giving Campaign, as did Give More, as did the Institute for Philanthropy. There's a long list of things that have not worked, and I really hope that you've kind of cracked the problem and the puzzle that all those previous efforts have not managed to do. And I just wonder what it is that makes this different. That means that you can crack what all of those things to try to do and have not done. So I'm hopeful, but I'm also very skeptical.
Yeah. Two very similar questions. Kath, I'm going to come to you first.
Yeah, I mean, Martin, gosh, we've worked on this a long time together. And I think the change, and it's been growing over the last 5 years, or you noted 2 years, is the recognition that there is no one single thing that's going to have to change, that we actually need a focused action around strategy, that we need to think about more than one thing changing in order to try and drive that right infrastructure, right connectivity between the infrastructure, right incentives, removing pointless bureaucratic barriers, just making this a lot more straightforward for people to do, number one, giving them the support that they need to do it, and then making sure that we celebrate that this is, to John's point, you know, part of our social fabric, part of our liberal democracy, part of the way that we conduct ourselves in our communities and in the world. And if we can do those things together in a connected way, I think we will learn from all of the lessons that have gone before. And we have every single change, every single program that has incrementally learned. I now think we're at a point where we recognize that we've got a system that needs really looking at with focus, with some investment to make that change, to allow the funds to flow.
One of the things that I'm optimistic about is that there's lots of different groups saying broadly similar things in this space. You know, Kath is involved in all of those conversations and is sort of a linchpin in many ways, but we're not out here on the CSJ saying one thing while there's another group over there saying something wildly different. And the fact that we've had ministerial involvement throughout this project, you know, Chris here this morning, Darren Jones, part of the process as we've gone, Stephanie Peacock's office involved as well, I think is cause for optimism in terms of government actually listening. And this, to use one of the panelists' comments, this is the right time for this. Rory, quick final point from you on distinguishing signal and noise, because there's lots of people talking about this. What would you say about making sure we get the clear cut through on the most important things?
I think the current interventions that are taking place, led at least in part by the two organisations on my left, are going to be very important that government adopts quite a lot of these proposals. I'd like to address one of them in particular, which is the match funding element, because some of us were involved with the universities about 10 or 15 years ago. They had some pilot schemes. We've got those. They're community foundations. There's the CSJ. There are other mechanisms currently in place, followed by a big match funding program, followed by a capacity building exercise, which was the Pearce review. It works. 10 years later, there is in real constant pounds, there is twice as much money being given to universities as there was from the day that match funding finished. And so if the argument says, my government says, well, if I put match funding in, it'll drop away. If you have good capacity building, it is a sustained, long-term, durable increase in funding. And I think I wish that the minister was here to hear that, because we have a practical example that is working today and every day through the university system, and that can be duplicated for civil society as a whole.
Great, thank you, Rory. It's exactly 2 o'clock, which means it's about time to wrap up. I just wonder if any panelists have any final words to say before we close.
I would just echo the thoughts, actually. I mean, it was the Chinese premier who said it was far too early to judge whether the French Revolution had been a success.
Yeah.
and so, if I was you, Martin, I wouldn't say it's been a failure. I'd say it's been a stepping stone to the successful, which eventually come, and everybody previously involved will be responsible for that.
Yeah. We've had fantastic analogies and metaphors during the course of the last hour. Would you join me in thanking our panelists, first of all? And thank you all as well. You've got a executive summary and recommendation list on your seat. We don't have full copies of the report ready today, but they are fully downloadable from the CSJ website. So do go and take a look at the full thing. Don't rush off. Stay for a cup of tea, a cup of coffee, and a chat. And yeah, thank you very much for being here.